All right. So hopefully you can see my screen. So what we're going to cover today, most of the sessions I do are based on mostly real scenarios. We try to provide business use cases. It's not just about using Azure and using Azure, but we always try to provide hands-on examples. We actually build things from end to end. So today we're going to be covering a use case where we're going to create a centralized database for all the college contact information. Um, Management, right? So we're gonna have to create a centralized database that stores and manages all contact information for all the colleges. We have to ensure that's secure. We have to have an ingestion pattern, so because they're moving data into our system, and we have to allow a way to bring in big data load, and also we have to do automation for processing using the most efficient storage inside of Azure. If you're new to Azure, a lot of the things I'm going to be showing you today are going to be related around things that are technically free when you first sign up, so you can give you that opportunity for you to actually build out this project if you wanted to. Now, for this project, we're going to have a couple of actors, right? The college administrators are going to be, that's going to be myself. We're going to be uploading some contact information into our backend system. We're going to show how we're going to be handling data ingestion and processing of this data. So we're going to show that today. And the other thing we're going to do is that some of the benefits of the solution we're providing today is going to have centralized consolidation of information. And then we'll have flexibility to support multiple data ingestion methods, which is going to be API or the using of a service secure FTP. So there's a couple of things we're going to be covering. And also, if we have time, we'll do some reporting. So this is the diagram that depicts what we're going to build out today. We have a college administrator who's going to be responsible for sending data to our backend systems. We're going to build out all these dependent systems that you see right here. And the end goal is that the end user will be able to create that data back out through an API of some sort. And then we have time to do some data visualizations in Power BI. You see the architecture diagram here. And I'm going to take this and put it in the chat so that way you have access to it. It's actually available in GitHub, so you can actually just follow along. And here's the diagram we're building out here. So basically, a user comes in through a secure FTP location, which we're going to build. They're going to be moving a set number of files. We're going to have a trigger that's going to be watching those files and pulling them into the respective steps. These lightning bolts are basically our Azure Function App. And then these are basically represent storage. We're going to have to build a queuing mechanism to allow us to collect multiple pieces of data, and then we can store that in a SQL database. And then we'll be able to expose it to an API. We're also going to introduce a NoSQL database for also additional data. So we're going to be trying to push these data to two separate systems. So just to show you how Service Bus works. And then here I have a previous recording of the session that I had back in February. And if you've done any kind of data ingestion, use anything in Azure or on any other platform, you probably hear of things like Data Factory, Databricks, Synapse, if you used Azure before, and these are kind of one of the few common ones out there. And also you can actually, we're going to be building a similar solution to what they have. So in terms of that, the purpose, we're going to do a data ingestion to ETL. We're going to be building our own key components when it comes down to what kind of servers they're going to be using. And for data integration, we're going to be using something like Azure Table Storage and SQL. And for data processing, we're going to build our own data processing workflow. Programming language is going to be T-SQL, which is and .NET, but we're not going to be doing really any .NET coding today. Scale, we're going to see that in action. How can we scale to accommodate large loads? Because that's something that's important. As data is flowing through your system, there's always going to be scenarios where you're going to have more data flowing through than normal. So we have to be able to elastically scale to accommodate load. That's one of the key benefits of or key features that you have when you're doing large data ingestion. And then the uh the the ingestion services are going to be used. We just talked about that: Azure services, Azure SQL, and blob storage. And then the way we're going to be moving that data is very important because data comes in one big file. A lot of companies, a lot of different systems can slice it up and move the data either in a stream. So in this case, they can copy data actively to move to for moving data across different data sources. So this is basically slicing. Now, Hadoop does actually chunking of files when you talk about Databricks. Then Synapse has a way of transforming the data and moving it through a stream. And in that case, what we're doing similar to that. We're going to be copying the data, moving the data, slicing the data, and then we're going to transform the data across the way into our systems. Orchestration, we're going to do event-based triggering. So when data lands, somebody gets triggered, gets picked up, it gets moved along. And then machine learning, we're not going to cover that today. UI interfaces, we're going to have a web UI interface for SQL. Security along the way, we're going to talk about how we can lock things down. So when we go to a business-centric solution, we want to make sure that for your business, how do we make sure that whatever we're spinning up in Azure can be secure, so it's actually compliant. And the rest of here, this is just basically talking about the cost here and the use case we just talked about that. Now, these diagrams here are just showing the different solutions, ADF, Databricks, Synapse, which is basically what's out there. Then obviously we just shown the diagram of how we're going to build ours. So these are the steps here. The steps are actually broken down into set up SQL, service bus. We're going to do the APIs. Then we're going to have a couple of Azure functions here that are going to handle triggers. We're going to have a trigger for actually pulling data off the service bus. We're going to implement error handling, try to secure our functions, and also we're going to talk about optimization and monitoring. We're going to see that as well. And then we're also going to do CI/CD deployment. So there's a couple of things we're going to cover here in this session, and hopefully you gain some insights into this. All right, so let's keep going. Putting all this in the no. All right, so before we get started, I just want to talk about some of the things that you need to um, have as prerequisites before we get started. Now, if you haven't used Azure before, I recommend going to this link and signing up. Microsoft does give you $200 free credit if you're brand new to Azure. If you're an existing user, then you may get pay as you go. This only lasts for a month, but you do get a lot of services. Another interesting, a lot of AI services in here as well. So I would advise you to leverage this. Once this is done after a month, then you switch over to the pay as you go. You get 12 months of this, and beyond to 12 months, you can actually get some additional things as free. Some of the things that are listed here, we're going to be leveraging that are free. We're going to be taking advantage of the databases, the blobs. We're going to take an advantage of, it's not listed here, but we'll be taking advantage of the Azure functions as well in here. But you can also see there's a lot of things here that are technically free. You have AI speech, search, and AI document intelligence, a very good one. 500 pages you get for free, and the AI vision as well, you get all that. So you can see more of these here. We click on that link and look at all the list of all the additional free products that they are offering for the next 12 months. After you've done that, then you can actually come in here and have a look at some of the things we're going to be using for our testing today. We're going to be using Postman, very popular products to test like APIs. I recommend using the web version because it's actually much more up to date than the ones you download on your local machine. So that's one. And also, if you're a developer of any kind, VS Code or is very, very popular. So we have Visual Studio 2022, which is basically the IDE version for Microsoft. If you wanted to go that route, then you can download the Community Edition. Um, this version here, I believe, just runs on Windows, but I believe there's one for .NET. I mean, there's one for Macs as well. Or you can go and hold on. You can go and oops, sorry, put that wait in admin. Give me a second here. Let me see admin. Okay. All right, so you can go here and download the VS Code. Now, VS Code is what I recommend that you should download because it supports all the operating system. It's very lightweight. And if you notice how many languages and the operating systems that they do support, so I recommend downloading that before you get started. So we go back to the actual code base itself. I'll scroll all the way up to the top. This is README. At the very top, you can see the code that we're going to be using today for our demonstration. Right. So in here is a code base. You can, in your case, if you're an existing, if you have your own GitHub repository, I would advise to fork it. And the only reason why I recommend that is that if we're making changes here, you will see all the changes reflected in your own branch as well in your own GitHub repository. So that's my advice to fork the code if you can. If you own it, you can either, there's two ways you can do it. If you actually own it, you can actually just put it down from here. So it's a URL. You can actually go into the GitHub desktop, which you have a version of your local machine installed just to pull it down, or you can download it as a zip. Uh, then another thing you can do that Microsoft does offer, which I recommend taking advantage of, is code spaces. Now, code spaces is still something that Microsoft has some bugginess with it, but it allows you to run VS Code in the cloud as opposed to having a version on your machine. All right. So now that you have this here and you want to download it, I want you to download it to look similar to something like this. So I'm running VS Code in dark mode. So let me see if I can pull this up. And I'm going to go over to the files. And then you can see some of the files here. So this is basically what we have checked in right now. Like I mentioned, there's a little bit of C# code in here. They're boilerplate code, so there's not going to be any business focus code in here. So you're not going to see anything that's related to business. It's just an entry level code, and this allows us to run some of the capabilities we have. There is we are taking advantage of what they call configuration driven developments, which is the idea of running things through configuration. A lot of companies do that today. CI/CDs use declarative coding. This is similar to that, where you declare what you want, you build what you need, and you execute it. And then we have libraries that actually glue the C# codes to the config files to produce what we're trying to do today. So we're going to be spending a little bit of time in the configuration file, just building out what the end product is going to look like. And that gives us a quick way to get all our business solutions out into production very quickly. And that's some of the benefits of using configuration driven development. All right, so some of the things that we have, Microsoft does support the idea of using libraries. This is already it's part of the project. These are the basic libraries that you get when you use Azure Functions, which is basically what we're going to be using today, but also we added an additional function here, which is basically what allows me to go into the GitHub repository, pull down this library. Sorry, the NuGets library, pull this down, and this version here is what I'm using. And that's what glues the configuration file, like I mentioned, to the code base. So you can actually start using it and through that. All right, so let's go back into the portal site and look at what we're going to be doing in Azure. So for those who are new to Azure, it's going to be portal.azure.com. And if you never used Azure before, you need to at least sign up with a Hotmail account, which is what I have, or your corporation account to be able to get it. You need one or the other. Then once you're signed in, basically, you land. If you've never used it before, you land on the empty screen. There'll be no history, anything here. I've actually used it a few times. So I have some recent things I've touched. By the highest level you have, for a personal account, the highest level you have a subscription. You can have as many subscriptions here as you need to. I forget what the minimum amount is, but you can have up to 400 subscriptions, I think, without no issues. And then there's a management tenant across that. But this is what we have. Now for the subscription, I'm in using my default subscription, which is what you would get is the AZ Azure subscription one. And if I actually go in here and go down to my resource groups, you will see that I have empty resource groups. So the order of execution is that you have the subscription, then you have the resource groups, and inside those resource groups, you have resources. So we're going to create, not here, but we're going to create through VS Code. We're going to create a resource group, and we're going to put some resources inside of that group. So let's start here. So the reason I'm starting here because I'm trying to I'm trying to most doing like code first deployments. So the code is down on your local machine. There's an assumption that you already have a portal.azure.com account set up, and now you need to connect to it. So there's a couple of extensions that you need to get started if you've never used VS Code before or you've never used Azure before. You would need you need to sign in. Get what that is now. Oh no, Azure account, I'm sorry. Azure account. An Azure account basically is what you would install. Microsoft, I already have one installed. So this is gonna get this is actually new to me. They saying that this is gonna get deprecated, so I'm gonna switch over to Azure Resource. And the second thing that you need is the function. Let's do that. Right, well, the first one, I'm sorry. This Azure function is what you need. And when you download both of them, you're gonna go here. This gives you the Azure account. And this is obviously going to be deprecated to Azure Resources. So maybe the next training, next one I'll be doing will be Azure Resource. And then of what it does is that if you're already logged in the past and your personal access token is not expired, you should automatically log into your account. And it gives you some boilerplate services that you have in here. It's not all the services that so Azure offers, but it's just a couple of them that's out here. And the one we are interested in is the Azure function. So now we have the code down here. I want to be able to build out the Azure function. What we can do here is that we can actually go in here, go into Advanced tab, and we're going to walk through what it takes to create a function app and what the dependencies are. The reason why I start here is because this actually walks you through 8 steps, so you don't have to worry about figuring it out, and it gives you a guide on how you have to do it. So we have to have a globally unique name. So I always go 2025 at today's date because the moving target. Uh, that seems like it may be available. And then these are plans related to how flexible your physical servers can elastically grow to. A consumption plan would grow to accommodate the data, so you don't have to worry about manually setting up a way to make sure that you have multiple servers grow according to the amount of data that comes through it. So if you do a consumption plan, it's a fine forget, you set it up and the Microsoft takes care of it. A flexible consumption plan is similar to that. Now, the premium and the application app service plan, I recommend going into these later on once you're comfortable using these two at the top, because this is more involved. You have to set up your I/O, CPU, and memory, and then it will scale depending on whether it hits any of those thresholds. But that's more involved. But I recommend start with the consumption plan if you get into Azure. There with locations, I always recommend choosing a location that is next to where you live. In my case, ECOS 2. I'm using .NET, which is my stack. The operating system here is an option, which is what I'm giving you. You can use Linux. I normally use Windows because that's what I'm comfortable with. And then this is where you create that resource group you talked about, right? It's going to pull the default that I put in. I'm going to select that. Then you have to create a place to store your deployment files. So it's going to use the same name. I'm going to take that. And finally, it's going to ask you to provide a way to capture all the endpoint information. So when we deploy the function app, we want to maybe capture performance, errors, and any other thing that we need. This actually captures and listens to our endpoints. So we have that. So what this is actually doing right now is going to go and build out all those steps. So you don't have to worry about what you need to create inside of your resource group. I could have started here, but this way it's much more easier to do it through VS Code. It actually goes and creates a resource group for us. Then not only does it do that, it's going to start putting in a couple of resources in here as well, so we can get started as quickly as possible. Now, instead of this app service plan, which I mentioned before, is going to have the name of the operating system in here. So this is the operating system we chose was Windows. And as I mentioned to you before, we don't have an option to decide how we're going to scale up. Scale up basically means adding a physical machine that's bigger in size. And scale out means basically having multiple machines of the same. So you can offload into multiple physical machines. So with consumption plan, Microsoft takes care of all this for you, so you don't have to worry about that. As this is a training video, basically we can start with that. So let me do a couple of more refreshes. All right. So now we have the application insights. We have the place to store our files. One more refresh. Let's see how that deployment is going. So that everything is fully created. Now you got that message here. So let me do one more refresh. We should see everything listed here. So we have the function itself. So this is the final one, the Azure function itself. So normally this Azure function here is where we're going to deploy our code into. So this is the container, uh, almost like a physical machine. If you're on-prem, where it says the Windows operating system, there's nothing, there's no code deployed in here. And to get started with CI/CD, there's a thing called a deployment center. So let me just expand this out here, and that actually sits inside of the resource. Instead of I put in some of my favorites here, but in the deployment center here in the function app, it allows you to connect to your CI/CD pipeline. So it's almost like connecting and setting up from here, and then it gives a quick getting started guide into set up CI/CD, and it uses YAML as well. So I'm going to select my repository. In this case, is going to be Git, and then I'm going to select my organization, and I'm going to select the repository which we want to focus on to pull the data out. I mean, pull the code out. So we're going to find the one that says ingestion to Azure. So this is the one, and then the only branch I have right now is just the master branch. Now we need a way to authenticate from GitHub into portal.azure.com to deploy our resources. So we have to set up a user identity. Microsoft takes care of that for us. All we have to do is just hit preview. It also goes ahead and creates a boilerplate YAML file. So if you don't know YAML, this is the best way to get started. And then when you hit close, I hit save. Not only is it going to create a YAML file for us inside of our GitHub repository, it's also going to kick off the build itself to start deploying the code. So it does a lot of things on our behalf. So give it a couple seconds. It should automatically refresh. Oops, something went wrong. Interesting. Oh, okay. Let's try this one more time. We got like a an error that came out from Microsoft. So do one more time. If not, we look at another way of deploying it. So let's do one more time. Select that one. Preview. And we hit save. Hopefully this doesn't work, then we'll find another way to deploy it. Because there's a couple ways we can deploy it, but this is I prefer to just show you how to do through a CI/CD pipeline. And what I can do is while that's going, let's see where I created the pipeline. Okay, that looks like it's setting it up correctly. This looks like it's working the second time. So I'm not sure what happened last time. So this created what I call a GitHub uh, workflow. So I'm back in my GitHub repository. You can actually see what it created here. I really have to do anything. And you also can, there's a thing called actions. And actions are basically like the pipeline itself. It's called actions in GitHub. I mean, and if you click on the actions, opening this guy up, you should see that it's going to start building out and deploying our code for us without us having to do anything. And this normally takes about a couple minutes to deploy. So what we can do is we can go back in here. You can see that's running here. You can check to see that's in progress here. So you can see it from inside of Azure, and you also can see it in GitHub as well if you wanted to. So now we're going to go back to our resource group, and that's basically what we're going to spend some time in. We go back to resource group, and now we're going to go back to our documentation and see what was that next thing to build. Let's go back here. So what's getting built up now? I built all this thing that's the lightning bolt that looks like lightning bolts are getting built out at this moment. So I don't know what happened there. So click that. A mistake. So we need to build this service bus and we need to build the SQL database. And then we start connecting things together. Then we can start doing some testing. So the next thing we're going to do is build our SQL database. I'm going to start with SQL because SQL is a little bit more involved. So I'm going to walk you through that step. And when you hit create from the resource group, you put into what they call your marketplace. Now, your marketplace basically is where everything lands in Azure. I mean, everybody has their own marketplace in AWS or in Google Cloud, but this is what the marketplace in Azure looks like. We're going to type in Azure SQL, and we're going to choose the first available one. So if I hit Azure SQL here, we'll create wizard. You get three options, right? So that's why I say it's more involved. So you have the option to go natively, which requires you to choose the SQL Server version. So there's a clear understanding that you know what you have on-prem and you want to use in Azure. So you have all the way up to 2012, all the way up to 2022. You pick it, and then you can bring your own license, and this will give you a physical server with SQL installed, and you can remote desktop into it. And then you can set up high availability if you wanted to with all always on. If that's something you had on-prem, you can set that up as well. Now, managing instance is different. You don't have RDP access. You're not in charge of networking. Microsoft takes ownership of that. The only thing that you can connect to is through you can go to Management Studio and you can connect into here. That way you can run all your agents and everything you have, but you don't have remote access into it or manage your network. This is completely native. So Microsoft, this is where Microsoft owns everything. And this is the one we're going to go and build out, which is much more easier. And we can show some of the capabilities of using a completely native SQL Server database. Microsoft does offer um, a free serverless database to 100,000 vCores. It seems like a lot, but it's not, depending on what you're trying to do. You can apply for the offer, but I can't because obviously I've been using this for a while. But if you're brand new, you get this for free as well. So it's going to drop me my subscription resource group, and then I have to provide a database name. So I'm going to keep the same names. So 2025, 402, oops, that. Like that copy. Then we have to create a server that the database is going to reside in. So I'm going to keep the server name, keep it in the same location. So in this case, I'm going to keep that East US 2. And here's very important, right? So this is typically what you're used to when if you use a SQL database before, you can log in through, in this case, it was Active Directory. In this case, it's Intra. So if you choose this by default, only authenticated users that are already part of your account, in this case, Active Directory or Intra, will be able to log in. You do have an option to do a mixed mode, which is basically SQL and Intra. In this case, we're going to be using just native because we don't have Intra set up on this machine. I mean, on this portal site. So we're going to go with SQL admin. I'm going to provide some credentials for that. I'm going to hit OK. So now and the default is always going to be production, right? And Windows Max will actually put the cost of here. This is a different setup. Normally they don't have that inside of here, but you should be able to go and configure your database. Now you can take the defaults if you're happy with the price. You can just keep going. But if you want to make some changes to it, you can just go back in and say, okay, I want to configure my database. I don't like the price. I want to get into something that's slightly more cheaper. And I recommend doing this because if you're doing testing, you want to go as cheap as possible or have the option to slide down to more of a cheaper option. Now, this is the default out of the bag um, when you choose the default setting. But if you change it over here to something that's more standard budget friendly, you can see the price drop down to $14 a month. So it's like there's so many ways you can actually get cheaper solutions if you want to start out. At $14 a month, you can do basic queries. You can upload files. Maybe you can upload files 1,000, 2,000 records. You might have some bottlenecks in terms of pulling files down, but outside of that, you should be good. All right. So now you've chosen the budget friendly. We're going to use 100. Um, Actually, we're going to use 200 DTUs because we're going to be moving a significant amount of files. At 200 DTUs, you get 290. It's $294 a month. It's cheaper than out of the box, and you get 256 gigs of storage. And the default backup is geo-redundant. Now, obviously, I'll explain to you why Microsoft chose that, but we can actually look at these top ones. Local redundant is basically what you're used to. You have a copy in your data center. Zone redundant is two physical data centers in the same region. So if you're in the East Coast and you choose Virginia as your data center, in this case, then you have two separate copies in that region. And geo-redundant is really what the default is because it wants to make sure you have two copies in region one and two copies in a separate physical region. So East region and Central. So that way, if one region goes down, you have a backup in the second region. That's why the default chose it. And this is still in preview. The zone redundant basically is multiple copies in multiple of those regions. So we're not going to be looking at that right now because that's still in preview. And we hit next. Leaving all the defaults. Very important. Network connectivity. If you notice, I set to no access. Do not set it to public because you're going to get really hit hard. Now, if you're in a corporate environment, most people tend to open it up, set it to public so they can have things like Power BI hook up into it. But recommendations is that you keep that no access or you make it private. Next, we're going to keep all the ledger stuff as defaults. You can see you can set up backup here if you wanted to. If you have one set up, you don't have to set one up now, but later on you can set it up. And then you're also going to sample and seed the database with some adventure works if you are interested in doing that when you're getting started. Tagging, very important. Tags are basically where you pay for your resources in Azure. So you have to have a cost center, and then we're going to review and create. All right, so this is getting created right now. If you go back into resource group, which is over here, and what we can do is look at our Azure function and see whether that was successfully deployed. So I have green light, so everything is green. So first time deployment. So a couple of the all these endpoints you're seeing right here are a depiction of what you see in your code base. So if I go into my code base over here, I can go over here. Every one of these represents an endpoint. So we have one for service bus, because we're going to be doing some work with server buses. So we're going to be referring to this code base as we're configuring. And this is the end result. We have the endpoints here. Now, the good thing about using Azure Functions is that it supports more than just your typical HTTP. They do have the option to do block triggers. So they do eventing. So when something lands in a blob, it automatically gets picked up. So this guy is always constantly listening to specific blobs. And then you have timer trigger, which is almost like a cron job, which allows us to set things to run every so often. And then in this case, we introduce the service bus, which is going to be listening to some of the information we're going to be putting off the service bus. So that's why Azure Function is very crucial and actually helps you move data in. All right, so we have that set up. The database is probably still getting configured, but we can create next one if we go back to our documentation, which is the service bus. So we go over here, back to the marketplace. We're going to type in Azure service bus, right? Let's do it that way. Service bus, see what comes up. There we go. And if you select the right one, you can pick the first one. Pick the service bus. Now, if you've ever done anything with queues, this is similar, except it has a couple of more features, which we'll talk about. Now, like anything else, any queuing system, you have a publisher and you have a subscriber who's going to put it off. So when you first provide, and we're defaulting to the subscription and the only resource group that we have, we also provide a namespace. I'm going to keep everything the same. 2025. Two. It puts us in our defaults. And the pricing here is very important because you need to understand how this works. Now, the reason why they recommend premium is because premium has a limited number of messages with no bottleneck issues. In this case, if you're using something that's slightly cheaper, you're going to be throttled if we hit those limits. And we will hit those limits today when we're doing the demo. Now, the standard one is similar to premium, but obviously premium has the ability to lock it down. So that means it's private within your corporation. That's another reason why they're recommending it. The standard basically is what we're selecting. And the reason why we're choosing standard over basic is because standard provides what we call topics, basically has queues. So this has both topics and queues. Okay, I'm going to keep the default. If you notice, I chose the cheap version. So guess what? I can't do private access, so I can lock it down. And then tags again means that you have to get billed accordingly. It's going to review and create. All right, so that's getting done. Let's go back to our documentation. So then if we go down to this, what we need to do next, let's go all the way down here. We have to set these up. So next thing we have to do is set up an Azure. We're going to have to set up a configuration file. This is an application setting for Azure Function. So that's getting deployed. We go back to our resource group. We're going to go back into our function. And then on the left side here, we're going to go and look for something called configuration. This is basically your app config file. If you're a developer of any kind, you probably heard of app config, web config, or some sort of configuration file where you store your key value pairs. This is similar to that. So we're going to create some key value pairs in here that is globally unique to the function. This is already pre-created for us, so we don't have to worry about that. We're going to get a config path. And this is just basically the path we're going to introduce to where our config files are going to live once we have all that set up. So we're going to go here, call it config. Hit apply. We can go to the next one. API key. And that's when we're calling the API key. When using APIs from Postman, we want to make sure we have a key that's provided along the way for security. We don't want our APIs just out there without having some kind of level of security out there. So then we have the app name. This is going to be used to, like I said, this is the name for the function app used for log analytics. So if you want to see how your application is performing across all the dependent systems, you need to provide a unique name so that way you can actually search on that unique name itself. So I'm going to call this function app training. Train 2025. 0402. Then we have the storage account. It's just referring to the name of where the storage account name is. So in this case, we're just going to refer back to the storage account name. I just took the default, make it easier, but you can name it what you want. I'm just going to choose whatever they gave me. And the service bus connection string we don't have because we're just building that in real time. So we have to go and get that from the newly provisioned service bus. So I'm going to take that, paste that over here. Make sure there's no space. Then I have to keep this window open. I'm going to open two more windows because I will need them later on. Log into Azure here. And we're going to go and grab the service bus connection string, and we also need the SQL connection string as well. So it's just launching this one more time. Go slowing and go to the resource group. I want to grab the actual service bus connection string, and I will show you where that is. So where's our service bus? Did I get provisioned? Yes, it did. So this is our service bus. And when you go into what we call the shared access policy. It's a weird name, but that's where our connection string lives. We're going to take the root. And then we're going to grab the connection string here. So this is the primary connection string, grabbing that. Go back in here, paste that in. And now we have that. Go back to our documentation. Now we have to grab the database. Now we don't have that either, so we're going to collect that as well. We just built a brand new database as well. So we're going to add that in. And we're going to grab the database connection. So the database itself. And when you create a new brand new database, remember we set it to no access. So Microsoft does give you the option to set up a firewall. So if I try to log into the system now and I put in my password, and I hit OK, it's telling me that you can't log in and saying that access denied. So I do have a username and password, but because there's also an additional firewall security in place, you kind of have to set that up. So if I go back to the overview tab here, you can set up a firewall. And this is where the networking becomes very important. Now, if you're in a corporate environment, I recommend going with a when you select a network here, you have to option to connect your network to an existing virtual network. Now, normally in the corporation, you already have a virtual network, so you just attach it to it. So that way, the only traffic that can get to this is traffic that's inside of your VNets, either through a VPN. So this is a recommended approach. This approach is only used when you do not have a VNet set up on your network or you don't have VPN connectivity to your internal office network. You would choose this as an option. Since you're getting started, this is an option I recommend. And you also have to choose allow Azure services because you're going to allow the Azure functions to communicate with this. So those are the two options you check. And once those two are checked now, and I go back to my come up from here, and I go back to my query editor, which is what I was in before. And if I log in now, I should have access to authenticate. I'm successfully logged in. And then I can actually go back to my code base. I do have some scripts here. I've got a simple script that's going to be using later on. I'll just do a validation to make sure that I have the rights to create or do the CRUD operations, create, read, update, delete. So I can actually create a new table, a refresh here. And go into this table, you see that the table has all the schema representations in here as well. So this is where we're going to be ingesting that data to. So this is pretty much empty right now, but we're going to move in data into that. So now that piece is set up, now if we go back to our documentation, we have actually no, I have to one more thing I got to do. I never got the connection string. So let me do that quickly before I forget. All right, so let's come off here. Actually go back in here. And I need to pull the connection string. Connection string here is just basically where it's at. The connection string is very, very obvious. It's under the settings. Now, because we need to set up Active Directory or in this case, Intra, we're not selecting this one. In the corporation, you select this because you're going to be using Intra for authentication. And there's an assumption you have an account that's authenticating on your behalf. So we're taking the second one. I'm going to go in here and add that in. And then we're going to actually add in the password that we have in here. So, yep, and apply that. And then we go back to our documentation. We have the time interval. This is a cron job that's going to be looking at SQL files later on and picking those up. So we're going to have to add that in. And the default is set to a minute. So every minute is going to circle around and see what any files are available to get picked up. So we're choosing the 1 minute. And I think we should be good here. So confirm, go in here. The next piece is this configuration files. Now, because we're doing configuration driven development, we're going to have configuration files there that actually just tell you what each step does. If you look at the URL that I put in the chat, you should be able to look at this yourself. We're going to go down here and go to our storage account. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is storage. So now we're down here. We can come out here and go into our next resource, which is storage. Now, I've never used Azure Storage before, or you hear ADSL. Data lake. This is similar to that. And the storage account starts off as a regular, but you can upgrade it to a data lake. So in this case, the storage composer has a components of containers, files, queues, and tables. So you can use it for a lot of things. It's not just for storing files. You can use it for a bunch of stuff. So the first thing I'm going to do is turn off intra because this by default is enabled. So I'm going to disable it. And then I'm going to go to my documentation. I'm going to build a couple of containers, right? So go back here, go up to my containers, and we're going to go back to the documentation. I'm going to add in a config container. That's location file config files. And let's close that window. The next one is going to add in a pickup directory, which is going to be used for files that get copied from the secure FTP, which we're going to have later on. So I'm going to add that in. And then we're also going to build a process files. These are files that have been parsed and dropped into process containers. So remember, we're bringing in large files. We're going to be cutting it up into manageable chunks. And then we're going to send it over to the service bus to actually process the files and put it into a SQL database. We're also going to have a couple of tables. This is going to track all our CBS pass files. So we have a million records and we break it out into 200 a piece. This is just going to track how many files are being sliced. So we're switching over to a table. I'm going to switch views to a storage browser to get a different experience. So we're going to add a table here. And we're going to go back to our documentation. And we're also going to add one for our NoSQL data store. So we add that. 2025 402. And then we have to create a share. So this is going to create a share location for our secure file. So when we drop secure FTP files, we have to put into a share in Azure. So we're actually going to add that in now. Now, Azure shares are very good because Azure shares give you 100 terabytes. So if you're moving a lot of files, this is the recommended route to go. It makes it easier for you to move files, so you don't worry about space considerations. So is that 2020? Yeah, have I got my dates right? 2025 042. And then when you hit next here, you're going to be defaulted. If you don't uncheck this box, it's going to automatically create a daily backup for you. If your files that you're moving needs to be backed up just in case you may lose them, I recommend leaving the default. If not, then you can just uncheck that. Then you won't have any backup in there. And you can hit create. And this is going to go and create a training folder for us. Scroll down here. The next thing we're going to do is look at the service bus. So let's go over here. I think we have the service bus open over here, so we can just look at it. So like I said, the service bus itself consists of queues and topics. Now, if you're familiar with queues, it's just basic. I mean, it's just basically a first in, first out, where one file goes in, or publisher publish files. There's only one consumer that can take it off, and then if you have multiple consumers, you have to have multiple queues. Now, topics are a little different. It allows you to publish once, but you can have multiple listeners. So you might have multiple databases. In that case, we're going to introduce two, and we can publish data to them. Now, the advantage of using a topic over a queue is that if you have a reporting system, you can actually publish it to a secondary reporting system, so you can do real-time reporting. So as the data is coming in, it's hitting two systems. The data you're looking at for reporting is as close or near real time to what is actually in the database itself. So to add a topic, we're going to go here. We're going to create a new topic called requests. Let's keep it basic. So these are where all the requests are going to be coming in through. And with here, you have 14 days. Any messages I put in here are kept for 14 days. So you can use it as a storage, temporary storage of information. And it's more advisable to use it in scenarios where you know the data that you're being sending is not as fast as the data that's receiving it. Also, it makes the advantage of doing this is that if you're in a banking system, your banking application might have to go down every so often to do maintenance, but clients are still sending the information. You can actually collect the data and store it here till the backend system is available. Now, the max topic size here they allow is 5 gig. If you have 5 gigs of data stuck here and you can't pull them out, then you have different problems. And then, like I said, the maximum retention period for these messages are 14 days. So once the topic is created, then you can go into that topic and then you can create the subscribers, or in this case, subscription that is going to be associated with that topic. So we have one subscription here, which is for NoSQL. Take the space out. And then on the subscriber side is interesting because it's going to try to pull the messages up at least 10 times before it decides to fall into a dead letter. Dead letter stays 14 days. Then everything gets cleared out. So 14 days is basically the default. You can increase it. I don't really recommend doing that. So there's no reason why you have things stopping for 14 days and not cleared it out. So we're going to create another one for the SQL. That in. And that's what we're done. Let's get done. So we're going to go back to our documentation. So now we've gone to the end of the road here. So we're going to start uploading these config files. Now, normally I recommend doing this through a CI/CD pipeline because it's a better way to do it. And then the formatting of your JSON files I can maintain across the system. This option I'm going to show you does have some quirks in it, but because I don't have a CI/CD set up to copy the files, we're just going to go old school for now. So I'm going to try to copy the files from here into our system. I'm just going to grab this files in here. It's over. Grab config files. It's over here. All right. Let's see if I can get them. All right. So I'm going to go over here. Close this out. Go into here, and we're going to go to our storage accounts. We're going to spend a little bit more time in here. So if I go into my containers and go into my config file, this is where we're going to be uploading this config file. So I hit the upload button. I'm going to browse for those files. And I'm going to quickly go through them and can do some testing. So almost there in about maybe 10 minutes, and we can do testing. Select all. And upload files. Doing this way is not recommended because you do lose the formatting of the JSON files. It kind of messes JSON files. So you have to come in here and reformat them. If you do through a CI/CD pipeline, it should be fine. But I want to walk you through these. Now, this is how we drive the execution of our data. So this is a file copy. This is basically allowing us to go in, create a file share that represents that. So I've already prepped it. And then it's going to put it into a pickup container, which we actually created, and it's going to create a folder name for processing. So to let someone know that it's ready for processing. and we go from there. So this I tend to, this is the bug. There's a bug with the UI, so I just refresh it this way. What's the next one? This creates a NoSQL database. If you want to do a quick sample, you can actually write a record into a NoSQL database. And the third one, we're uploading a file into our backend system. So when we upload files into our backend system, we have to decide what the size of the file is going to be. In this case, the size of the file is going to be 201, including the header. So it's 200 records a piece. If you have 100,000 records, we break it down into 200 records each one. So we're looking at somewhere around 50 files if you have like 10,000 records, and then maybe have 500 files for 100,000 records. So break that down. Okay, let's save that one. Let me see what I did there. I think I saved that. I need to format it. So let's go cut, paste, format it. Automatically format it. It's cheat sheet for formatting. This is when we have the data in our backend system. How do we get the data back out? Some ETL or ELT. Once we get the data back out of the system, we can actually do some formatting. This is our service bus trigger, which is going to be responsible for taking the files and putting into that database we just created inside of Azure. So I will take care of that for us. Azure SQL. This is sample payload in JSON. We might not get to this one. This is just an extra config file. This is a trigger. So when the file gets dropped into for processing, it actually takes care of handling that. So this is the guy, this is the main guy that takes all our messages that we're getting into our system and then puts it into our requests topic ready to get pulled out by the consumers that are listening to it. That's a very important configuration file. And this is just when we're done. We want to make sure that we can pull data back out of our system. So we're just doing a sanity check, make sure that all the data we pulled in is ready to be used by our clients through an API according to the demo. So we have to make sure that we have an endpoint so they can pull the data back out. And if you have time, you can do reports. So we can pull reports out of SQL. Even though we have it locked down through firewall, but it's basically using Azure Function trying to pull the reports back out. And this is just a sample to upload files. Getting that to Y here. And again, a lot of this stuff is self-documented in the GitHub branch. You can actually see that in there. So I already put it out there so you can see it. And now liquid templates we never had a chance to talk about. Liquid templates is basically a way of transforming files. We can actually add additional fields. We can pull or rename JSON payload in real time. So it's basically real-time ETL. And we see that today when we're actually going through and we're pulling data back out, how to use that. And then sometimes we have scenarios where the client wants to represent the data in HTML, which is becoming more popular now. So I have that in there just to represent how we can pull data out and represent in HTML if we needed to. So now all that is done. The next thing we're going to do now is actually go and do testing. So let me scroll back to our Azure function, and then we can start testing. So here's Azure function here. And then we're going to grab the base URL. This is the base URL, and we're going to bring it into our training folders. Let me just grab this training folder here. I'm going to use Postman. Grab Postman. Uh, I'm bringing Postman to play here. All right. So we're going to be doing the upload part first. So what we need to do is grab the latest base URL, which is that. And then go back to Postman. And we're going to paste it to override this one here. So copy, this is one from previous training session. So we're going to get this one here. Come on, that. And let me see if I can get some sample files to do some testing and get some sample files here. Import some files up here. It's into play here. So with some training files. So this, I'm just putting some sample files we're going to use for training today. So I normally have a training folder that I have right there here. I'm going to be using a US College database. US College database is about 3 or 4 million records. So before we start putting that volume of records in our system, we want to just inspect one of the files in Notepad, right? So I'm going to open a Notepad++. It's basically a CSV file. And the way it works is that when you do ETL into database, you have to make sure your headers match the data you're putting down in here. So that's something that I take into consideration. So basically, this is just a couple of about 10,000 records in here you're pulling. Let's see what's going on over here. Give me a second here. Nope. So this is about 10, this is just roughly about 10,000 records. So I can scroll to the end. There we go. So it's about 10,000 records we're pulling just now. It's over 10,070 records. So this is a good one to do a start a sample. Even though there's a lot of records, we can actually upload it through the API. So if I go here, if we look at our headers, the key we're using is 68. Now, this is very important. These keys are important because if I go into our documentation, you will see that these keys match. So this is saying uploading a file, parsing a file, writing a batch file to storage. So this is the key we're going to be using. And the other thing you know is we use API key, which you call that configuration file. So any key that any API key name you use in your config file has to also be represented here. So that's what we're doing. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select the file which we're trying to upload, new file. We're going to go into the 2 meg file, which is the one that we had down here. So 10,000 records. We're going to open that. And before I hit the send button, I wanted to just go and show you how this configuration of a code works. So we go to our config file. We look for this particular config file, which is what we're focusing on. Go here, find it. We can actually turn things on and off. So it's almost like a circuit breaker, right? So if something's not working, you can turn it off. Now, each step here is actually a step. So this is a workflow. So we have a workflow that represents how many things we're going to hit. And we can turn things on as needed. So we have is enabled, goes true or not. In this case, it's enabled. This is set to false. Everything else is set to false. This is set to false. This is set to false. This is set to true because this is writing to our batch file. But in this case, if we set it to false, we don't want it to write to a batch file. So we're going to set that to false for now. We're going to turn it back and set it to true. And we're going to save it. So we go back to our system here. Oh, we left that file. I should have hit send. Let's try one more time. Grab the file, open it. This file uploads. Oh, sorry, that's why I got to use a cloud version. That's it. That's my bad on that. Let's try that one more time. Pick a small file. Okay, now hit send. In theory, what you do is you just echo back our file that we're trying to upload. So actually it's bringing it back as JSON. I mean, it's actually bringing it back as regular. It's parts the file, but it's bringing back. It's just echoing the file back and just telling this is the file we're going to get uploaded. But if you want it, if you have clients who want their backend system only understand JSON, so what we can do is that we can turn this off and make this false, and then we can make this true. Like I said, this is circuit breakers. We can have to turn things on and off as needed. Actually, we're going to convert to JSON, so we're going to make this true. So let's make this true. Hit save. Go back here. Hit send and see what happens. And boom, we got JSON. So this is a quick conversion where we're just sticking HTML. We're just sticking a CSV file. We just automatically convert it to JSON. There's no data types involved. It just understands it and just converts it. So this is if you have a backend system that understands JSON, or you have a third-party system like Sanity2 that only expects that data to come in as JSON, you can still feed your system CSVs, and then you can just use configuration to convert it to JSON, and then you just send it across to the API if you need it to. So that's kind of one business ask that I get a lot. In this case, we don't want to keep it as JSON. We want to store it as CSV. The reason why is that the size of a JSON file is a lot bigger than a CSV file. So the best way to move files is preferably using a flat file if you want to get the performance benefits. So we're going to make that false here, make that true. We're going to keep this as false. We're going to keep this as false now. And what we're going to do is that in here, we're not doing any transformation before we push it to our system. We're just going to go and write it into batch files into our backend system. I'm going to set this to true. Save this. We're going to get a different experience now. We got this back. So now this is actually processing those files rather than just echoing it back into our system. So I come back here. I come off here. I go into our process folder, which is basically what that's for. You see our CSV files live here. I can go into this one. It's actually the same name that's up here. So go into that. I can pick the first one, hit edit, and then you can see the headers up there as usual. But if you notice that because we use the 201 records, if you include the headers 200 records, you only have 200 records we're looking at here. So this is how we chunk it and put into our backend system, right? So if you go back to the architecture diagram, so basically what we've satisfied so far for the business ask, and I can scroll up here and see how far we're going with this. Go back here. So we got the files moving in here. We've uploaded a manual upload and want to make sure it hits the service bus before it hits our database. So we're going to have to check that. So if I go into our service bus, which I had up and running here, you should see a little blurb on here. I shouldn't have hit refresh because it takes a while to refresh that. And in the meantime, while that's refreshing, let's go and look at our NoSQL database, see whether it made it to our NoSQL database. So we have tables. Like I mentioned before, this table is just keeping a log of all the different physical parts files. So this is mainly for auditing. And then, I don't know why I keep doing that. Go back here. Go into our tables. And we hit our tables here. We want to see what our data made it to our backend. So the data didn't make it here. So obviously there's an issue. There must be an issue. Something happened here. So we have to do a little bit of troubleshooting, right? So if we go into here, we can see that there was no blob in the messages. So when you're using something like a service bus, you have to make sure requests come in. So messages are sitting on the queue, which is our situation. And then make sure requests actually go out of the system to make sure someone is actually listening and collecting them off the queue, right? So if I go in here, if you go to Service Plus Explorer, that tells you whether the message is sitting in the queue or not. In this case, there's nothing here. There's nothing. It doesn't look like there's anything in that dead letter. So it's not working correctly. It's either not going on the queue or it's not being taken off the queue. So one of the ways we can actually determine that is that we need to go into what we call application insights. Now, I mentioned before, application insight actually looks at the overarching system and tries to figure out why there's errors in the system. So it does the work of figuring out why you're failing. You don't have to worry about why it's failing. You just take care of that for you. So we got these failures here. We got 500 and something failures. So we have a lot of problems going on here. So do you know SQL trigger? It's not working, and even the SQL trigger is not working at all. So there's a problem with one of the two of these triggers. So if I go into transaction search here, which is basically what I'm going to do to try and figure out what the errors are, I can type in my errors, and if everything works as planned, it gives me the errors that we're getting from the service bus. Um, and I have to figure out which one the error is. So let's see, we can start with this one. Can actually double click on it and just take you directly to where the exception is. So that's one way of looking at it. You can look at it from here and you can actually figure out what the exception is. It does a very good job of walking through the stack. It tells you what's going on here. It tells you what's trying to put in the queue. But it failed while the NoSQL trigger was trying to pull it off the queue, and it could be because it's not formatted correctly. So it's saying this failed to pull it off the queue itself. So what I can do is I can go back into my documentation and see which one pulls it off the queue. So this is for searching. The one that actually pulls it off the queue. This is for our service bus. So I can actually take this one and have a look inside of my. I was just doing some troubleshooting, which is actually a good thing to do. So I'll go into my storage account. Actually, that's the wrong one. Sorry. Go home, go into my resource group over here, and then go back to my storage account. Then in here, I have to look at that config file. It could be I didn't format it correctly because I remember I mentioned before we had some formatting issues. Let's go here, find that configuration file. And normally when you use configuration over code or configuration driven development, the issues always isolate to the configuration files because that's the only places that we've made real changes in here. Let's see. That's interesting. This one is SQL. Let's do that. Maybe it wasn't formatted correctly. I'm just going to go with the fact that it wasn't formatted correctly. Hit save. And let me go back to upload and do one more upload, see what happens. And it's pretty fast. If you're going to make it to the SQL database it's almost instantaneous, right? So even though it hits the service bus. Let's go over here. Go into the process. We created another file, which is good news. So at least that piece worked. And we can go into the actual NoSQL. Go into our tables right here. And now we have data. So that was the issue. The data didn't make it to our back end here because it wasn't formatted correctly. So that's a good way to tell. Because we'll do isolation, because we'll isolate our code is you can look at this one as well. This is for our SQL database. So let's see whether it made it to, we know it made it to service bus now because data ended up here. But we want to see whether it made it to our made it to our SQL database. So we'll open up this one. Go into Query View Explorer here. Query editor, we're going to log in. And then we can just select, right click here, let's select the first 1000. So whether I made it here. And you can see data made it here. So we have, this was a success. We had one bug in there where we just had a config file. The actual config file wasn't formatted correctly, but our data made it to two separate backend systems. So the client is kind of happy now that at least from our perspective, from the development perspective, we've actually proven that we can get data from our API into our backend system. We can select the data through our backend system to make sure it's there. But how do we expose that to our API? That's the next question, right? So if you look at the architecture diagram here, we have data flowing in, but we want to be able to get data back out. And that's really the key thing here. So we can expose it to dependent systems that need to pull data from there. So the next thing we're going to do is try to solve this side of the equation, right? Since we have data going in. So we're going to go here. I'm just going to pick the record here. And we're going to search for University of Iowa inside of our SQL database. Here, it actually automatically fills that figures, finds the actual name of the columns based on the CSV headers. We only want to get University of Iowa as our search. And now we have that information. We want to be able to expose that to our API through our search. So I'm going to grab this and go to the next one, which is our search, right? And we're going to look at the key that's associated with it. We're going to try to build, this is the one for SQL. We're going to try to take and build one for our SQL. So we're going to add, inside of here, we've already done a filter, but we want to be able to take the raw expression and then search under that raw expression. So we're going to go into our API here, and then we're going to try to search for that data as is. But I'm going to touch it, we're going to just leave it as is. Yeah, this come back in an error here. So now we have another error here, which is basically a syntax error we have here. I'm going to grab this and keep this, because then I'm going to use this later on and show you what the purpose of that syntax error. So if you put your API out there and the end user is trying to test your API and then they get this syntax error, they will have what we call a error code is attached. And this error code is very important because this is how you track why this failed and where it failed. But you still get 200 back, so the system doesn't go down, it just tells us an error here. And this syntax error was like, know what that is because this is specific to certain headers. So if I go back to my documentation over here and I scroll down to our configuration section, we know that we're doing a search for data in our NoSQL, while we have a search in data in our SQL database. So we're using the wrong key. We're searching, so we need to convert to the right key. So this is key driven. Each one has its own rule. Hit the same button. And we work with clients. We have clients that actually have mixed APIs up, API keys up, and they get data that's coming back that obviously doesn't represent this. So here we have the data coming back from the backend system, right? So this is actually calling NoSQL database. It's putting data back out. Um, I did add some filtering inside of configuration file, and I'll show you where that is. So this is the configuration file we're working with. So if I go back to our storage account open here, this is our storage account open here, and I go back to this one, and I go into our config file here, and select the one for searching our NoSQL database. Open that up, and we can walk through the steps here, right? So it's going to Azure Storage, it's doing a quick search, it's looking at a table here, it's making sure there's results. Then it's actually doing an additional step here. It's actually doing some removing of properties that we don't care about. And this is important if you're trying to not show all the fields. If I turn this off and set it to false, oops, people just froze on me. And I save this and I go back to our API and I hit send, you get some additional information that will otherwise have hidden. So there might be a scenario where there's a client who you do not want to expose certain pictures. Now he's giving me a row key back and he's also giving me a timestamp back. So in this case, we want the timestamp and the row key. So this is where the ETL comes, or the ELT, where we're doing some we're loading the data, or we're extracting data from our backend system, or doing some transformation. You also can actually transform this into in this case, I don't have this template. If I want to transform this into HTML, this may or may not work. I haven't tested this in a while, so let's just try. Hit save. Go back here. Go to our API, then hit send. Let's see what happens. Oops. So I think I know what the issue is. So now we got another error that's come up. So we're going to look at that in a second. So I'm getting an array. So you can manage a single object. So I'm going to array back. Hit save. go back again one more time. Run. And then again, HTML back. We hit preview. Oops, it's going to generate HTML. I don't know why it's going to generate it, but oops, is that preview or sorry, body? It's yeah. Normally, you could normally just hit preview, and you should be able to just change it to HTML and hit preview. And I support that. So basically, what we have is I have the 668 records coming back in HTML. So this is what basically the client would get if they wanted to receive HTML. They would get in this format. So that's basically giving you a way of actually using. And also, the other thing you can do is that if we don't want to receive as HTML, we can actually just choose and change the liquid template to data, and then we can keep it this as false and go back to our UI and hit send one more time, and this should convert it into back into JSON. Maybe notice that obviously this JSON is a little messy because our template, a liquid template, is not really formatted correctly to have represent the HTML as here. There's no commas in here. This is not set up properly. So even though it's not messed up, it gives an opportunity to go in here and massage the actual template. So imagine if you're doing testing and the tester came back and said, "Oh, this doesn't look that great." You can actually go here in real time. And you can actually go into the data template and make the necessary adjustments to actually fix this. So with CI/CD deployment, you can just get that corrected in here. You can get that deployed out here. I can tell exactly what the problem is on this one. But yeah, you can have a way of actually checking it out and making sure that that's correct. So that's basically how you can actually use your configuration file just by looking at the configuration file here. And then you can go in, you can make necessary adjustments to actually pull the data out. So I'm just going to turn this back off so that way we can actually go in here. Another one. We're looking at NoSQL for now. Let's go back to NoSQL. Make sure I'm filtering the right one here. And let's turn this liquid template off for now. And that brings us back to a no state. So the clients save that. We check, send, make sure we're good. Oops, back us. HTML. All right, so now that we have this back to a known state and we're putting data back out here, what we can do is how do we check for our SQL side of the house? So this is our SQL database. So we want to be able to check it on a SQL database. So let's go back to our code base here. Just to come back to HTML, just make back convert that back to JSON so you can represent it better. Yeah, there we go. Sorry about that. And we can change the key here, but when we change the key back to the SQL one and we try to hit send, we also get syntax error. So this is actually doing what we call syntax check-in to make sure that even what we're passing in here is correct. It has to at least represent the backend syntax that you're trying to pull. So we do select top 100 star from DBO, I think it's college. Hit send. Again, data back. So you can see that we're selecting the SQL database now. And this is just selecting SQL database based on the information that we have. We can also fine tune it. But remember, we haven't changed the endpoint. So the endpoint is still the same. And we're using API to collect backend system. So now the client is very happy we have a way to satisfy both asks from the SQL and NoSQL database. The other thing, the final part that we have to do is how do we ingest large loads? How do we test and make sure that the system we're going to present to the client is able to handle large volumes? Because they're going to be sending a lot of data. They're going to send out multiple different data sets as well. So we have to make sure we can configure for that. So the thing that we're going to introduce now is called a Azure Container Instance. So this is the part here, which we're going to visit last. So container instance is basically one instance which does one purpose. In this case, we're going to just create a simple instance. Microsoft manages it. And they do give us a nice link that we could use. Then click on the link. It takes us to the Microsoft site. Um, and then it says how to create an on-demand secure file transfer server with a new Azure file persistent storage. Remember, we already have our own version, so we don't need to create our own persistent storage. We already provision that, so we can do it ourselves. It does a good job of sending us into what we call a template. And initially, when at the beginning, we're provisioning resources through the marketplace, but when you do what they call custom template, this is what we're doing right here. Microsoft is actually provisioning one for us. It's going to log into your system, which is what I did, and it's going to drop us in what they call a custom deployment. And then we have to choose our resource group. We only have one. ECUS2, the name of our storage account, which is, I believe, is training 2025-04-02. And then we also have an existing storage account here. The file name I kept the same. And then we're going to create a password for this one. Hit next. There is no tagging on this because this is a custom deployment. And this is actually getting deployed. So it's going to go out and check to see whether our file share. It's going to do some validation to make sure that share name is available, which is validated. And then it's now creating the actual physical server with secure FTP installed on it, server installed on it, and we should be ready to go. This takes about a couple of seconds, take maybe about 20 seconds to set up. We're going to our resource group. Let's give it a couple more seconds. And while that's loading up, I'm going to load up this my favorite secure file transfer application. I use FileZilla. That's what I'm using today for my testing of our FTP files. We're moving a lot of files today, so we'll use that FileZilla to move those files. And let's do a refresh to see whether, oops, it's going to drop me. Hope it drops me the right place. Put this aside for now so we can come back to it. Put this aside. I want to make sure. So these are secure file. It's still deploying. As you can see over here, it's just almost finished. Now, this is going to go to Docker Hub and it's going to pull down the image that represents a secure file transfer. So if you have a Docker image, this is a way to actually pulling files from Docker image into your container instance. And it does spin up the cheapest volume, which is a secure Linux version. And then you have what they call a fully qualified domain name, which you need. So that one is going to be needed to connect to FileZilla here. So if I put in my host name, I wait for that to finish deploying. Let me see if I can grab the files we're going to be using for testing. Let's see, let's go here, grab this, and then I'm going to go over here and grab these files. Hopefully that should be done soon. It's taking longer than expected. Okay, deployment just finished. So go into here. So we're going to grab the fully qualified domain name. We'll grab the username, which is secure FTP, and then we'll just put in the password. And then if you've used secure FTP before, we're always on port 22. Then we hit quick connect to make sure everything's good. We will get a thumbnail or a fingerprint. And you have to just be able to say you can trust the device that's connected. Oh, authentication failed. That's interesting. But I did that correctly last time. Maybe I didn't put the right password in. Let's try it out. Maybe I didn't do that correctly. Try one more time. Hmm. Source. Always trying to connect. It's not responding. Why is it not responding? Why? Let me try something else. Yeah, sometimes these things happen. So let me see if I can stop the server. And sometimes you have to stop the whole thing and restart it. It's the first time. I haven't done this in a while, so I'm surprised that this is failing. Let's reconnect. Yeah, it looks like we have an issue here. Yeah, I'd love to show you this piece, but interesting. Oh, sorry. Wrong ports. That was my bad. Let's try this one more time. Hmm. Delay connection, 3 seconds, previous connection. Yeah, unfortunately, we're having some issues with this. Please be aware that document has some issues. Poor document is, yeah, maybe it's something to do with Azure. Yeah, I can't figure out why this is, but the connection is there, it's established there, but it's not connecting on my side, and I don't have any firewalls open to prevent it. Any firewalls to prevent connectivity. I'm not sure why this is not working. Let me try by IP. If this doesn't work, then we have to do some reporting. We see if we can do reporting if this doesn't work. Two time. All right, it's doing always trust this way to work. Since authentication is failing, so nope, it's not my password. All right. So, I mean, I can't really show this part of the process. Let me see if I can do one more deployment of this. So let me see if I can open this up and delete that. Do another quick deployment. Because I think the deployment gets this messed up along the way. I mean, we get this once in a while, but not doesn't really happen that often. Just getting deleted there. Okay, that's been deleted. So let's just try one more deployment. It's going to storage account is training. 2025 to account save. I don't know what happened to the password here. Maybe it was a password issue. This works. One more try. And this should be the last step. If this works successfully, we do have see, this is still up. A couple of seconds. There we go. That was quick. It's much quicker than last time. So let's go and refresh here. Grab this. I'm going to grab the fully qualified domain name, preferably rather than the IP address. Um, Open up our FileZilla one more time. Yeah, let's go here, paste that. Keyport 22. Try to do a quick connect. Hmm. Definitely something wrong with my IP address today. Hmm. It is not trying to connect for some reason. Yeah. Oh, there we go. Is yeah, the authentication keeps failing for some reason. Okay, finally we got it. So in the upload directory, we can have this is our folder here, and we are going to start moving real load. So these files are pretty big, they're about a million each. So in a typical production environment, you move maybe a couple million records each time if you're doing a very quick data migration into Azure. So I'm just moving a bunch of files from point A to point B. This can take a little while. But while that's moving, what we can do is we can go into our Azure account and look at that share that we created earlier. So we'll keep this, I'm going to shrink this for now. Go back into, and you can see the performance here, CPU usage here as well. So we're going to come off here, go into our storage account, and we're going to go into that file share that we created earlier on for storage. If I click on the training file, we should see at least some files inside of our folder if I browse for it. So we got a couple of files out here. They got 0 bytes because obviously they're still copying over, and for some reason my internet today is very slow because I'm recording as well. I'm like 10 meg. I don't know why I'm getting 2 meg today. Well, basically you have scenarios where two files are getting pushed in simultaneously. The business is continuously moving files through the course of the day. So you might get a couple of million records that get moved through the course of the day. You have to continuously ingest them and feed them and process them as quickly as you can receive them. So this has gone through, and on the top of every minute, we're about to get to the top of another minute. The files get processed, and the way order of execution is the files come in here first, and at the top of every minute, which is the next 5 seconds, it will start picking up the files from here and then move it to folder container which we created earlier on, which is the pickup folder. And this should start has a file for processing. So these files already moved pretty quickly. And then if you now we're moving large loads now, we're going to put our system under a lot of stress. So how do I know how we're performing in our environments? And this is very key because when you're doing data ingestion, you need to understand how your performance of the system is. In some cases, you want to see how your servers are elastically growing to accommodate the load in real time. So this is where a thing called live metrics comes into play with application insights. This actually looks at your whole system or the whole system in function apps and tells you all the dependent systems it's communicating with. So this telemetry is live. It's like using looking at live logs, but it's connect anything that is connected to it to tell you. So this in this case, we're talking the storage account. If you notice, we're already up to two servers. This dependency calls right now running at 200 milliseconds. We want to get them down to close to 0 milliseconds. So in order to support that, once things start stabilizing out, this will start going down to lower milliseconds, and then we'll start spinning up multiple servers to accommodate the load. So with this being on now, we can actually go over here, go into our resource group. Let's look at what's going on in our service bus. So by going to our service bus here, we can see all the data that's moving in. So we can look at the topics. Remember, we had one topic, two subscribers, right? And you can see data is currently moving in here. You can see that we're moving. You can see that the NoSQL database had some exceptions because that got some stuff got stuck in here. So these end up in these are things that are stuck in the dead letter queue that has not been cleared out. Because initially we had an issue and that gets stuck in the dead letter queue. So that's the reason why you're seeing these errors. But normally you should see 0 bytes in here. So the SQL database is going fine, no issues. You can actually go into the SQL database, and I won't recommend doing this, but you can actually go into service bus and you can peek at the next record that comes in. So you can, if you want to check to make sure that the data that you're sending in is correct, you can just peek into the next message. So it's going to wait as soon as that message shows up. It's going to tell you how to send it. So it's basically this is 39K sent to the backend system, and this is sliced up into 200 files. And you can see that we're sending to a backend here. Now, also what we can do is check SQL database and see how many records I ingested while we've been talking. Um, and so we're actually up to the production level quality of data being ingested into our backend in terms of volume. Because that's the key thing here. You have to make sure that even though you have a very good solution, you should be able to ingest the volume that the business is looking for. So if they're looking for someone like maybe it's somewhere around 50 or 60 million records, maybe even more every month, you have to, I mean, every hour or so, you have to be able to see whether your system can accommodate that. So let's do select count from start from, let's see where we are. Oops, from DBO and hit run. 480,000 records. So this is moving pretty well. I mean, we have almost 500,000 records that have been brought in here since we started. If you go back, and this is where we spend time. Once the system starts running, you want to go back to application insights and make sure that your servers are coming in load. Now, as data is coming in again, more data is coming in, is going to increase servers. We're up to 5 servers now, right? We didn't do anything. The Microsoft actually recognizes that we're moving more data. So now this is growing here. Obviously, the ingestion is going to start growing as well because we're spinning more and more servers up just to accommodate the load. So if you had a production level service bus, you're not going to have any bottlenecks in your service bus and you get data coming in much more quicker. But because you use a cheap $10 one, obviously data is going to get at some point it's going to get threshold or when you hit those threshold limits. And it's also going to be preventing us from putting too much messages on the service bus because we have some gaps. But the goal here is at least we can see all those information. If you notice, it's trying to flatten it as much as possible, bringing down the milliseconds. You can see some exceptions here. This is because we're hitting those limits and our servers are increasing. The other thing we can do from a quick glance inside of application insights is that you can actually see the performance on your independent systems. Parsing, NoSQL triggers ran 3,000 times. This is running roughly 780 milliseconds. If you're happy with that number, then it means your system is running as expected. You can check individual messages in here as well. So each quarter ran, you can check it. And then you can do what they call a breakdown. So even though you see this message is one line, you can actually view all and to tell you, it will break down and tell you all the systems it hits, how long it took, um, how long each system took to actually go run in the system. And to before we close out, the final thing I want to talk about is logs. How do we monitor and produce charts on our logs? How does that work, right? So there's a thing called a custom query where we can actually query the system live to see how it's performing, right? So I'm going to go into here. I'm going to grab a simple query right here. And we're going to query based on the actually I'll grab this query here, and then we can actually show you this first. And this is a simple custom query I wrote to actually go in and look at how my system is behaving while I'm ingesting data. You can see some exceptions are coming in here because we're hitting those thresholds based on, let me see what would I have here. Yeah, this is the one here. Okay, I pasted it here. And if I run this here, it's going to go in and pull data live and rendering the charts based on the information we have. So this is what we're seeing right here in the last 24 hours. Obviously, we haven't had this on for 24 hours, only had it for the last hour. So if we run it now, it should bring the data a lot closer. So these are the different data points that are in here. The one where more, if we're interested in specific things that are running, so we want to find out how many files were inside of here that want to just select the ones that we want to here. We can actually narrow down on select the ones that we care about. And then we can just select, like I want to see how many search, if I want to see how many things we're putting in our database, we can actually do things like that. So this is now one that received messages from SQL in the database. So I'm just unchecking certain things here, and then we're narrowing it down to how long it took to get in here. The other option is that you can actually just uncheck that, and then you can go into your config file. In this case, we want to be able to see how many files were put on. This is why I want to see how many files were put we're taking off the service bus. I'm putting it to our backend system. I want to see what happened to my SQL database, because maybe I want to investigate how often my data is taken off my SQL database. I can actually go in here, find it, hit return. And this is where this config file is very important. Everything's slow today. Go in here, go into edit. And then each of these steps has a key that's associated with it. And this is the key that we care about. So we grab this key here, go into our config, replace this key here. We can actually get as far as narrowing down basically what we're looking for in that time frame. So we had some records we run manually here. We have ones that are running over here as well. That gives us basically gets us close to 101. And also we can just narrow it down to the last 30 minutes if you wanted to get more specific. So we can see where the time generated is greater than a go, and which you want to get the last 30 minutes to build our charts, because we only been running this for less than 30 minutes. So this is actually more closer to this is close to the information that we're looking for. So we started off beginning, we had 500 records. At one point, we got up to 1,500 records, but normally you have spikes like this. That means we're throttling. So you're seeing those errors coming out. So these are kind of indicators that we're throttling because Microsoft is saying, hey, you're taking too many messages and putting in our queue. We're going to throttle it for a little bit. And then all of a sudden, we have an ingestion of a certain amount of records, 843 right now, or 845. Then this is going to keep putting out more and more records. As we refresh now, we have one for 844. So this is pulling records in as well, running it. And then you can get an idea of how much data you're ingesting. And then that will give you an idea of how much data you can ingest over a period of time based on these real-time charts that are coming back. But these are about the benefits of actually using configuration during development. So we actually built an end-to-end product inside of an hour and a half that the client can use. And it's almost ready for production. We're going to push it out to production. You have to set up your CI/CD pipeline. It should be good to go. So that's all I have to show today. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. I won't say it's an introductory lesson, but this is recorded, as I mentioned at the beginning. Normally it takes a few days for me to put a video out. You can go back in and replay and actually follow the steps as you want to. The GitHub repository out here is obviously available for you guys to go and download, put in your environment, and then from there you can start building your own version and pushing your own version of data into your own Azure cloud environment. All right, so that's all I got for today. I'm going to stop sharing. If you guys have any questions, you can put in the chat or you can actually unmute yourself. All right, so let me stop sharing. If someone has one in the chat. But there's a work question here. Oh, thank you. All right, thank you guys for joining. Hopefully I will see you guys in the next couple of weeks for another session. I'm going to stop the recording.